Well, welcome viewers to the Pro Theologist channel. I'm Dr. J.W.A.U, theologist since 1994, Central Coast, New South Wales, Australia. We're in the life of Muhammad and the verified revelation structure of the people of the book. We've made it to episode 17, the fear of public exposure within the Islamic ideology amongst the Muslims. In the previous episode, preservation instincts began silently governing examination as emotional safety, certainty, belonging, and existential stability increasingly fused themselves to preservation of the Islamic ideological structure itself. In this episode, viewers, the pressure moves outward into visibility. The fear amongst the Muslims of public exposure. Because once unresolved questions begin threatening inherited identity, relational continuity, moral certainty, and social stability simultaneously, silence no longer functions merely as caution. It increasingly functions as camouflage. And at first, the Islamist fear rarely appears dramatic externally. Usually it appears socially intelligent, measured, careful. The individual slowly learns which subjects tighten the room, which questions older facial expressions, which conversations suddenly create distance. And eventually the Muslim's nervous system begins anticipating rational consequence before visible consequence even arrives. And that mechanism becomes extraordinarily powerful, viewers, because now the Muslims no longer merely evaluating theological continuity privately. The Muslim increasingly begins calculating social survivability itself. Who may withdraw? Who may reinterpret loyalty? Who may begin watching differently? What relationships may destabilize? What identity may become publicly uncertain? The pressure deepens there, viewers. Questions become compressed publicly while remaining unresolved internally. Language becomes adaptive. Visible certainty becomes performative. And eventually the Muslim quietly notices something important. The atmosphere now regulates behaviour before Islamic ideological authority intervention even becomes necessary. And so the Muslim unconsciously begins managing reactions, tone, hesitation, visible agreement, and conversational boundaries, because public uncertainty itself increasingly carries relational and existential consequence. And that pressure intensifies further once historical and moral contradictions begin surfacing more visibly during Islamic ideology examination itself, especially surrounding child marriage consummation traditions, female captive appropriation traditions, execution traditions, assassination narratives, conquest expansion structures, and obedience absolutism preserved within Islamic historical tradition itself. And the tension deepens there because the individual, the Muslim, the Islamist, is no longer merely confronting abstract theological disagreement. Now the conscience itself begins colliding against inherited allegiance. And moral contradiction behaves differently from intellectual tension. Intellectual tension can remain theoretical. Moral contradiction reaches conscience. The fear is no longer only being seen by others. The deeper fear is being exposed before the truth itself. And that realization for the Muslim destabilizes psychology, relationally, spiritually, and existentially. Especially once the Muslim begins sensing possible divergence between Muhammad's emerging Islamic ideology, revelation structure, and the prophetic moral witness already established among the people of the book. Because the prophetic structure carried among the people of the book was not merely built upon authority claims. It carried covenant morality, prophetic accountability, protection of vulnerable, verified revelation, tested witness, and Christ-governed examination. And that distinction matters more enormously, viewers. The Quran repeatedly reinforces obedience, collective unity, and allegiance stabilization structures. As we read Quran 8:46, it reads, "And obey Allah and His Messenger, and do not dispute and thus lose courage." Because once unity preservation becomes emotionally fused to the Islamic ideological authority, stability, visible disagreement can begin appearing dangerous before unresolved examination and verification has fully concluded. And for the Muslim, the nervous system adapts there too. Silence reduces exposure. Agreement to the Islamic ideological way restores equilibrium. Concealment protects continuity. And visible conformity preserves rational safety. And eventually, many Muslims begin managing appearances automatically because exposure itself now feels physically, psychologically, and spiritually unsafe. And that's not always through visible punishment. It's sometimes through fear of destabilization alone. Yet beneath the managed appearances of the Muslims, the unresolved questions still remain standing. Does Muhammad's Islamic ideology revelation structure truly align morally, behaviorally, and prophetically with the already established witness carried among the people of the book? Or for the Muslim, has fear of exposure progressively narrowed open examination before continuity testing has fully concluded? Viewers, that distinction remains critically important. Because throughout biblical revelation structure, truth remained accountable to examination and verification either way, despite public pressure, inherited loyalty, authority resistance, and relational consequence. And we can take the Bereans who examined claims carefully against Scripture rather than surrendering discernment to exposure anxiety, inherited allegiance or social preservation, or fear conditioned silence in Acts 17:11. Because verified revelation survives scrutiny without requiring concealment, performative certainty, atmosphere management, fear conditioning, or social camouflage to preserve allegiance. I'm Dr. JWAU, theologist since 1994, here on the Central Coast, New South Wales. I'm going to ask you to like and subscribe to encourage the channel. Press the bell if you like the content. Comment to educate me, and share the video to help somebody. In the next episode, viewers, we together are going to move into the moral fracture within the Islamic ideological structure. Because once conscience begins colliding against unresolved moral and theological contradiction, the tension between preservation and prophetic continuity intensifies radically and rapidly. And I'll see you then.